America buckles. The U.S. completely folds in tariff war with China. On May 12, China and the U.S. unexpectedly issued the Sino-U.S. Geneva Joint Statement on Trade Talks, agreeing to slash tariffs to 10% by May 14, 2025. The first round of 24% additional tariffs will be suspended for 90 days, while the second and third rounds will be scrapped entirely. In return, China will pause or cancel its non-tariff retaliatory measures against the U.S. Who could have predicted that the fierce Sino-U.S. tariff war would last just 1 month and 10 days? Has this global economic threat really ended with such an anticlimactic whimper? Hi everyone, I'm Lily, the rebel queen who loves playing with U.S. stock. Just as American households finished stockpiling daily necessities and Chinese factory owners laid off assembly line workers, the first round of the tariff war came to a sudden end. On the surface it appears to be a draw, but in reality, I believe the U.S. lost and lost big. In this first round of the Sino-U.S. tariff war, Trump's tough stance lasted merely 40 days before he buckled, an outcome no one anticipated. This self-proclaimed greatest president in American history, who vowed to make America great again, folded after just 40 days of fighting China. On April 2, Trump announced in the White House Rose Garden a 10% baseline tariff on global imports, declaring it America's Liberation Day, while threatening additional tariffs on China. At this point, U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods reached 30%, including the previous 20% fentanyl tariff. On April 9, the so-called tariff emperor escalated the trade war further, raising tariffs on China from 30% to 54%. The next day, dissatisfied with China's reciprocal countermeasures, Trump angrily jacked up tariffs to an absurd 145%, blaming China for the hike. He claimed the astronomical tariffs weren't his fault, but because China wouldn't listen. This created the highest tariffs in history, effectively constituting a trade embargo. People in both nations and worldwide began preparing for the coming trade crisis. The U.S. stock market experienced massive turbulence, with the S&P 500 plunging 860 points and the Nasdaq entering technical bear market territory. Global capital markets panicked as chaos seemed imminent until suddenly, China and the U.S. became good friends holding hands in Geneva. The tariff war was suddenly over, with both sides returning to mutually acceptable tariff levels, much like a quarreling couple making up after a fight. But beneath the surface, the global balance of power has begun to tilt. Why do I say America lost, and lost big? Because Trump started this tariff war but couldn't sustain it and had to sue for peace first. Though the thick-skinned Trump claims China initiated contact with the White House, close observers know China maintained an unusually tough stance this time. Not only did China announce reciprocal countermeasures, matching U.S. hikes dollar for dollar, but also posted a "we'll fight as long as it takes" video on Platform X. Trump, by contrast, repeatedly posted on social media that the high tariffs were unsustainable and 145% was too much, comments any normal person would interpret as backing down. Trump obsessed over who would make the first call. On April 8, he tweeted, "China really wants a deal but doesn't know how to start. We're waiting for their call. It will happen." Later, he told Time magazine that China wanted to talk and that its leader had called him. But when pressed for details about the call's timing and content, he dodged, "I don't want to talk about it." Whether speaking with South Korea's acting president or attending the Pope's funeral, Trump kept mentioning China's call. Even when he couldn't find Vice President Vance at a Naval Academy ceremony, Trump joked he must be taking China's call. Now the whole world knows he was desperately waiting for China's call. Trump was like a husband in a marital Cold War, too proud to apologize but constantly checking his phone for his wife's message. China's strategy of matching tariffs, declaring it would fight to the end, and calmly waiting for America to blink first constituted a direct challenge to U.S. dominance. When a lion king is challenged by a younger male, it's either aging or wounded. America is no exception. Like when the Houthis dared to fire missiles at U.S. carriers, whether they hit mattered less than the act of defiance itself. That America started this tariff war but folded first has a simple explanation. Trump couldn't take it anymore. Trump launched this war to bully other nations into paying tolls. He never actually wanted a trade embargo, just to scare China into submission. As the world's largest trade deficit nation relying heavily on imports, a trade embargo would be like self-starvation. But Trump didn't expect China's steel resolve this time. Domestic backlash grew deafening. Americans faced both shortages and price hikes. Economists estimate over 80% of tariff costs ultimately fell on U.S. consumers and businesses. On Platform X, users complained, "Trump's tariffs are taxing us, not China." While public anger could be managed, corporate pressure became unbearable. China's 125% retaliatory tariffs devastated U.S. farm and energy exports. When China halted U.S. soybean and LNG purchases in April 2025, Iowa farmers and Texas energy firms lobbied the White House to end this self-destructive trade war. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and National Association of Manufacturers jointly warned the 145% tariff would cause supply chain collapse and job losses. Boeing lost billions from cancelled Chinese orders, its stock plunging 8% on April 21. This corporate revolt stripped Trump's tariff policy of crucial domestic support. Worse, tariffs fueled inflation fears, sending Treasury yields soaring from 4.3% in early April to 4.8% by mid-April, with 30-year rates hitting 5%, a 2024 high. Investors are rushing to sell U.S. Treasury bonds and are turning to safer assets, leading to a drop in Treasury prices, which directly raises the borrowing costs for the U.S. government. Meanwhile, the total debt of the U.S. federal government has exceeded $36 trillion, and in 1 month, $6.5 trillion in Treasury bonds will mature and need to be repaid. Additionally, in the first half of 2025, the U.S. federal government's budget deficit has surpassed $1.3 trillion, making it the second highest in history for a half-year period. Trump's global tariff blitz was partly meant to address this fiscal crisis. He boasted the new tariffs would bring $20 billion daily, $730 billion annually, enough to slash deficits. Reality delivered just $5 billion daily, crushing this fantasy. The tariff's inflationary impact also prevented Fed rate cuts Trump desperately needed. He publicly called Chair Powell stupid for maintaining rates. A 0.8% rate cut, from 4.8% to 4%, could save nearly $300 billion annually in interest payments, easing deficits and debt rollover pressures while extending dollar hegemony. But this exists only in Trump's fantasies. None of his tariff goals materialized, instead they backfired spectacularly. Facing potential political peril, Trump had no choice but to reverse course, hence the Geneva Statement. Ever the face-saver, Trump never admitted calling China first, implying it must have been Secretary Benson who made contact to preserve his tough guy image. Before negotiations, Trump tweeted that 80% tariffs were just right, so now the agreed 30% rate can be framed as Benson's compromise, not his surrender. A masterclass in saving face while cutting losses. During the 90-day tariff truce, businesses will scramble to restock Chinese goods, likely boosting Q2 import figures. But don't expect price relief for consumers. Corporations rarely pass savings from tariff reductions to shoppers. That's all for today. If you found this analysis helpful, please like, subscribe and comment. I'm Lily, the rebel queen who loves playing with US stocks. See you next time.